Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for being here. I want to point out one clarifying matter at the outset. The report did, in fact, find bias. So insofar as anyone is suggesting that there was no bias found here, that's just not true. There was, in fact, bias found. What was not found was any smoking gun indicating that that bias translated to and was admitted to have translated to how anybody did their job. But the absence of evidence on that point is not the same as evidence of absence. And so I think we need to keep that in mind as we have this discussion. Mr. Wray, I'd like to start with you on this point. Let's assume for a minute that these text messages between Strzok and Page, let's assume that these came about earlier in the discussion and that you just swap out the name Trump for Hillary, as such that the text messages said, well, she's not ever going to become president, is she? No, we'll stop it. What if that had been the exchange occurring earlier in the Midway investigation? In that circumstance, in that hypothetical, could she, as a practical matter, have been prosecuted, assuming that the facts warranted it, assuming that people making the charging decision concluded that there was good cause to charge her? Or would the bias displayed in that exchange make it too difficult to proceed?
Well, Senator, I'm reluctant to engage in discussions of hypotheticals.
It's what we do. We're lawyers. We talk about hypotheticals, right?
But I'm no longer practicing as a lawyer. Now I get to blame the lawyers. It's a wonderful experience. So I'm not going to try to engage in specific hypotheticals. What I would tell you is that I expect all of our employees to engage in professional conduct, including in how they communicate with each other by text message.
I get that, and that didn't happen here. So if let's make it more of a hypothetical then. Let's take it a step back. Could that be a complicating factor if you had text messages between agents involved in a case indicating bias against the target of that investigation? Can that be a complicating factor in deciding whether to bring charges?
I think any time that agents conduct themselves in a way that doesn't have not just objectivity, but the appearance of objectivity, that can have an impact on the viability of the case.
Thank you. Mr. Horowitz, let's talk about these text messages for a minute. Was it easy for you to get them?
No, it was, well, the initial batch was easy. They were with the FBI, and we requested them. The latter part of this, over the last 6 months or so, was challenging.
Challenging. When you say challenging, tell me what you mean by that.
So when they were produced by the FBI, it turned out that there was a period during which, about 4 to 6 months, I don't remember the exact time, where there were no text messages produced to us. It turned out there was a flaw in their collection software, or a failure in their collection software. We then went out and seized and obtained their 2 phones, voluntarily, I shouldn't say seized, obtained their phones from the FBI. These are now FBI devices we're talking about. And our cyber forensic team actually undertook a series of steps to seek to exploit, to extract the missing text messages from the phones. We first used our own tools to do that. That was step 1. We then went to a contractor that we use, a vendor that we use, to see whether there were additional tools. They provided us with some additional tools, so we did a second extraction and gained more text messages. We then went to the Department of Defense and asked them if they had additional tools that those first 2 steps didn't use. They said they did, and they gave us those tools, and we used that and extracted more text messages. We then went to the FBI and said, okay, here are the steps we've taken. Do we miss anything? Would you do anything differently? They said they wouldn't. We then did a quality control check, as you're supposed to do, again, following the rules, our forensic examiners, and they discovered in that last search, which occurred last month in May, that the phone had a database on it that was actually also doing a collection of text messages. They extracted those messages from the phone and found the second part of the August 8th text, no, we'll stop it. That was found in early May because of that 4th effort to extract information from the phones. it turned out that the FBI wasn't aware that that database on there, which was supposed to be an operating function, was actually collecting data.
They weren't aware of that and didn't give it to you, but had they gone through the same steps you had gone through, they might have found it.
Correct.
Does that cause you to have any lack of confidence about whether or not you have all the evidence you need, all the evidence you've requested?
Yeah, clearly, as a result of that effort, and we're going to issue a separate report about the technological efforts we undertook there, and I'll be careful on how I describe them because I'm also a lawyer, not a cyber expert. But the concern is we now believe that not only are we unsure whether we have 100% collection in the period for which there was this blackout, 4 to 6 months, but it's now clear to us that even when the software at the FBI was collecting text messages, because the August 8th period was within the collection period, we had the incoming page to struck text. We didn't have the response. It's now clear to us that even outside this blackout period, we're not convinced that the FBI was collecting, for obvious reasons, 100% of the text messages.
Okay, that's obviously of concern. Mr. Wray, let's jump back to you for a minute. I think we can all agree that Mr. Comey should not have made his July 6th announcement and press conference. I assume you don't disagree with me on that. But would you have made a charging recommendation at all? Or would you have left that to the Department of Justice?
Well, Senator, as I said, we accept the findings and recommendations in the report. My own view is that the policies about public disclosure, as you've alluded to, are pretty clear about what we should or shouldn't do. As far as making charging recommendations privately, I think my view...
Yeah, I'm not talking about recommendations.
Right.
I'm talking about charging decisions.
So my view is that the FBI doesn't make charging decisions.
Okay, it just isn't done. Mr. Horowitz, the report says that Mr. Comey's machinations, quote, resulted in Lynch and Yates concluding that it would be counterproductive to speak directly with the FBI director. Can you unpack that for me? Help me understand what that means. Is the idea here that Lynch and Yates were simply afraid of exercising their authority, their oversight responsibilities, because they were afraid that it would look like political interference? What's that about?
So a couple things. They were responding to the fact that Director Comey, rather than speaking to them directly, went through his chief of staff to one of their aides to them to relay his view on what he was going to do. What they told us their assessment at that point was, based on their prior dealings with Director Comey, was, first of all, if they went to him directly and said, don't do it, it would, first of all, look like strong-arming, and they weren't sure whether he would comply or not with the instruction. They concluded that it would be more effective, or they would have a better chance of changing the decision if they went back the same way to him with their message, which was to their principal associate deputy AG, to his chief of staff, to him. And as we lay out here, they reported back through that means that they objected or recommended, or actually, let me clarify this, they told him that they did not believe he should do it. He's testified to us that he took that as a recommendation because they didn't call him directly, and he decided they were leaving the decision to him, and so he decided to go forward.
Before I call on Senator Klobuchar, I need a quick clarification. You said earlier in reply to Senator Corden that Comey used Gmail for work, but only for unclassified information. How can you know that if you didn't get access to that account?
I'm sorry, let me correct that. Based on the emails that we saw, which we observed by looking at the FBI's server and what ended up going back to the FBI, you're correct, Senator. I can't sit here today beyond what we looked at and say precisely what other purposes he may have used it for.
Okay. Senator Klobuchar.